The sun clawed at the earth, turning the plains to a cracked mosaic of dust and despair. Caleb's boots crunched against the brittle ground, each step a small rebellion against the weight in his chest. His shadow stretched long and thin, like a man stretched too far by hunger and loss. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the faint tang of sagebrush and something sour, maybe death, maybe just the land itself. His horse, a sway-backed mare named Mercy, had collapsed an hour back, her ribs sharp against her hide, her breath a final shudder. He'd left her there, unburied, because the ground was too hard and his hands too weak. Now, he walked alone, a rucksack slung over one shoulder, the leather strap cutting into his skin like a dull knife. The horizon offered nothing but more emptiness, a line that promised neither water nor mercy. His lips were cracked, his tongue a dry stone in his mouth. The canteen at his hip sloshed faintly, enough for one more day if he rationed it right. But rationing was a kind of hope, and Caleb had run dry of that long before the water. 3 weeks ago, the cattle drive had turned sour, rustlers in the night, half the herd gone, and the foreman blaming him. They'd left him behind at a nowhere town called Red Wash, with nothing but Mercy and $1 in his pocket. The $1 was gone now, spent on a meal that hadn't filled him, and Mercy was just bones under the sun. He'd been a cowboy once, proud and sure, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. The wind kicked up, stinging his eyes with grit. He squinted, catching a faint shape in the distance, a ranch house, low and sprawling, with a corral glinting under the sun. His legs burned, but he moved toward it, driven by the stubborn instinct to keep going, even when going meant nothing. The house grew clearer as he approached, its weathered boards silvered by time, the corral holding a single horse, a chestnut mare with a coat like polished fire. She tossed her head, restless, her hooves stirring dust in the pen. Caleb stopped, his breath catching. She was beautiful, wild in a way that reminded him of Mercy in better days. His hand twitched, wanting to touch her, to feel something alive under his palm. He didn't hear the woman approach until her shadow fell across him. She stood tall, her silhouette sharp against the sun, a rifle cradled loose in her arms. Her dress was fine, too fine for this scorched corner of the world, but her face was hard, eyes like flint. "You're on my land," she said, her voice low, cutting through the wind. "And you're eyeing my horse like it's yours." Caleb's throat tightened. He hadn't meant to stare, hadn't meant to step so close. His fingers brushed the corral fence, and the mare snorted, stepping toward him. "Didn't mean no harm," he rasped, his voice rough as the earth. She's a fine animal." "Keep your hands off her," she snapped, stepping closer. The rifle didn't rise, but it didn't need to. "She's not for touching. Not by the likes of you." Her gaze raked over him, his torn shirt, his sunken cheeks, the dust caked into every line of him. "You look like you crawled out of a grave. What do you want?" He wanted to say he wanted nothing, that he was just passing through, but the mare's eyes held him, dark and knowing. He stepped closer to the fence, slow, his hands open. "She's skittish," he said, nodding toward the horse. "Needs calming." The woman's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. "You think you can do better than my hands? She's half wild, and you're half dead. Get gone before I make you regret it." But Caleb didn't move. The mare's ears flicked, her body tensing, and he saw it, the fear in her, the same fear he carried. He raised a hand, slow, his voice dropping to a murmur, words he'd used 100 times on Mercy. "Easy, girl. Easy now." The mare stilled, her head lowering, and he felt the woman's stare like a brand on his skin. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The horse stepped closer, nuzzling his palm, and for a moment, the world was just the three of them, dust, heat, and a quiet that felt like a held breath. The mare's breath was warm against Caleb's hand, a fleeting softness in the baked air. Her muzzle pressed into his palm, searching, and he felt the tremor of her trust, fragile as a sparrow's wing. He kept his eyes on her, not daring to glance at the woman, whose silence was heavier than the rifle she held. The sun bore down, relentless, painting the corral in stark lines of light and shadow. Dust hung in the air, catching in his throat, but he didn't cough, didn't move. The mare's ears flicked, and she let out a low, contented snort, her body easing as if she'd been waiting for someone to see her, truly see her. The woman's boots scuffed the dirt, breaking the spell. "How'd you do that?" she demanded, her voice sharp but frayed at the edges, like she wasn't sure whether to be angry or amazed. Caleb didn't answer right away. He let his hand linger on the mare's neck, feeling the pulse beneath her coat, steady and alive. His own heart felt unsteady, like it might crack open if he let it. "Been around horses," he said finally, his voice low, scraped raw by thirst and days of silence. "They talk if you listen." He stepped back, slow, giving the mare space. She watched him, her eyes dark pools of knowing, and he felt a pang, sharp as a blade. Mercy's eyes had looked like that once, before the plains took her. The woman's gaze narrowed, studying him like he was a puzzle she didn't trust. "You're no hand," she said. "Look at you. Barely standing. What's a man like you doing out here, half-starved and alone?" Her words cut, but there was something else in them, a crack of curiosity, maybe pity. Caleb's jaw tightened. He didn't want her pity, didn't want her questions. The weight of the past 3 weeks pressed against his ribs, the rustler's laughter, the foreman's cold dismissal, the endless walk through a land that didn't care if he lived or died. He saw it all again, the campfire's glow, the herd's low moans, the moment he realized they'd left him behind. His hand twitched, wanting to curl into a fist, but he kept it loose, open, like he had with the mare. "Didn't plan to be here," he said, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were gray, storm-colored, and they held no warmth, but they didn't look away. "Just passing through." She snorted, shifting the rifle to one arm. "Nobody passes through this stretch unless they're lost or running. Which is it?" Her tone was hard, but her posture softened, just a fraction, like she was testing him, waiting for a lie. He could have lied. Could have spun a story about a job waiting somewhere, a family he didn't have. But the mare's steady breathing anchored him, and the truth slipped out, rough and unpolished. "Lost," he said. "Lost everything." The words tasted like ash, but they were honest, and that was all he had left. The woman's lips pressed thin, and for a moment, the only sound was the wind, keening through the corral posts. Then she turned her head, looking out at the horizon, where the land met the sky in a jagged line. "Lost ain't new around here," she said, almost to herself. "But you don't touch my horse again unless I say so. Understand?" Caleb nodded, his throat too dry to argue. She gestured toward the house with her chin. "There's water inside. Food, if you don't make trouble. I don't trust you, but I don't let men die on my land either." Her voice was firm, but her eyes lingered on him, searching for something he wasn't sure he could give. He followed her, his legs heavy, each step kicking up dust that settled in the crevice of his boots. The house loomed ahead, its shadow offering a sliver of relief from the sun. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling of wood smoke and leather. A table held a pitcher of water, and he stared at it, his mouth aching. She watched him, not moving, the rifle still in her arms like a warning. As he reached for the pitcher, his mind drifted back to Mercy, to the nights he'd whispered to her under starlight, promising they'd make it through. He hadn't kept that promise. The water was cold against his lips, but it didn't wash away the guilt, or the mare's eyes, or the woman's stare, heavy with questions she hadn't asked yet. The water slid down Caleb's throat, sharp and cold, like a blade cutting through the dust caked inside him. He drank slowly, savoring each swallow, though his hands trembled around the tin cup. The woman stood by the door, rifle still cradled, her eyes tracking his every move. The room was dim, lit only by a single window where the sun bled through in a harsh slant. Shadows pooled on the plank floor, and the air held a faint tang of lye soap and old grief. A chair creaked as Caleb eased himself into it, his body aching like it had been wrung out and left to dry. The woman didn't sit. She stayed rooted, her silhouette framed against the light, as if she could bolt or shoot at any moment. He set the cup down, the metal clinking softly against the table. His mind flickered back, unbidden, to the night the rustlers came. The campfire had been low, the herd restless under a moonless sky. He'd heard the snap of a twig, felt the prickle of danger, but the foreman had waved it off, called him jumpy. By dawn, half the cattle were gone, and Caleb was the one left standing in the blame. He saw the foreman's face again, hard as the plains, spitting words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're done, boy. Ain't no place for you here." The memory stung, sharp as the wind outside, and he clenched his jaw, forcing it down. "You got a name?" the woman asked, her voice slicing through the quiet. She hadn't moved, but her tone was less sharp now, like she was weighing him against some invisible scale. "Caleb," he said, his voice rough, amused. Caleb Holt. He didn't ask hers. Didn't feel he had the right. She nodded, just once, like the name was enough for now. "I'm Eleanor." No last name, no softness, just the word dropped like a stone into still water. "You look like you've been walking a long time, Caleb Holt. Where from?" He hesitated, his fingers tracing the cup's rim. The truth was a tangle, red wash, the drive, the betrayal, but he didn't have the strength to unravel it all. "North," he said, vague as the horizon. "Cattle drive went bad. Left me behind." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't press. Instead, she set the rifle against the wall, a small gesture that felt like a truce. "There's bread in the cupboard," she said, nodding toward a corner. "Dried beef, too. Eat slow, or you'll regret it." He stood, his legs unsteady, and found the food. The bread was hard, the beef tougher, but it was more than he'd had in days. He chewed carefully, the act grounding him, pulling him back from the edge of memory. Eleanor watched, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. The mare's whinny drifted through the window, sharp and insistent, and Caleb's head turned, instinctive, toward the sound. "She's been like that since I got her," Eleanor said, her voice quieter now, almost reluctant. "Kicks the fence, won't let anyone near. Bought her off a trader who said she was broke, but she's got a fire in her I can't touch." She paused, her eyes flicking to Caleb. "You did something out there. She listened to you." Caleb swallowed, the bread sticking in his throat. "Horses know when you're not afraid," he said. "Or when you're too tired to be." He didn't mean it as a confession, but it felt like one, and Eleanor's gaze softened, just a fraction, like a cloud passing over the sun. "You know horses, then," she said. "More than most." It wasn't a question, but it hung there, waiting for him to fill the silence. He thought of Mercy again, her steady gait under starlight, the way she'd nuzzled his shoulder when the nights got too cold. "Had one," he said. "Lost her a ways back." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything. Her collapse, the endless walk, the way the plains had swallowed her whole. Eleanor didn't respond right away. She moved to the window, looking out at the corral, where the mare paced, her coat catching the last of the light. "This land takes what it wants," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the wind's hum. "Horses, men, dreams. Doesn't much care." She turned back to him, her eyes searching again, but this time, there was something new in them, recognition, maybe, or the shadow of her own losses. Caleb met her gaze, his chest tight. For the first time in weeks, he felt seen, not as a failure or a ghost, but as a man still breathing, still fighting to stand. The light in the room shifted, the sun dipping low, painting the walls in hues of amber and ash. Caleb's hands rested on the table, the bread and beef gone, but the hunger in him lingered, not for food, but for something he couldn't name. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of Eleanor's words, her silhouette still sharp against the window. Outside, the mare's hooves thumped softly against the corral dirt, a rhythm that matched the pulse in his temples. He wanted to go to her, to feel her warmth again, but he stayed put, tethered by Eleanor's gaze, which held him like a rope pulled taut. She moved away from the window, her steps deliberate, and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You're not staying long," she said, more statement than question. "Men like you don't. Always moving, chasing something that ain't there." Her voice was steady, but there was a crack in it, a hint of something buried, anger, maybe, or sorrow. Caleb's fingers tightened around the cup, the metal cool against his skin. He saw flashes of the trail again, the dust-choked mornings, the foreman's sneer, the moment he realized he was alone. "Wasn't my choice," he said, his voice low, rough as the plains. "Didn't plan to lose it all." He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the table, where the grain of the wood swirled like a river he'd never cross. Eleanor let out a breath, sharp and short. "Nobody plans it," she said. "Doesn't stop it from happening." She paused, then added, softer, "This place, it strips you bare. Takes what you love and leaves you to carry the bones." Her words landed heavy, stirring something in Caleb he'd tried to bury. He saw Mercy's ribs, stark against the earth, and felt the ache of her absence like a bruise. But there was more, his father's voice, years ago, rough with whiskey, telling him to be a man, to hold tight to what mattered. He hadn't. Not then, not now. The memory burned, and he pushed it down, focusing on the mare's distant whinny, a sound that felt like a lifeline. "You've lost something too," he said, not a question, but a truth he felt in the air between them. Eleanor's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he thought she'd snap at him, send him back to the heat and the dust. But she didn't. She looked out the window again, her eyes distant, fixed on the mare. "Her name's Juniper," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bought her to replace something else. Didn't work." She didn't elaborate, and Caleb didn't ask. The silence stretched, filled only by the creak of the house settling, the wind's low moan outside. He understood her meaning, not in words but in the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her fingers curled into her palms. He stood, his legs unsteady but stronger than before. "Let me work with her," he said, nodding toward the corral. "Juniper. I can help. Won't ask for nothing but a place to sleep tonight." It was a risk, offering anything when he had so little left, but the mare's eyes had pulled at him, and he needed to feel useful, even for a moment. Eleanor's gaze snapped back to him, sharp and searching. "You think you can fix her?" she asked, a challenge in her tone. "She's not some broken tool. She's got a will of her own." "I know," Caleb said, meeting her eyes. "That's why I want to try." He didn't say the rest, that he needed this, needed something to hold on to, even if it was just a horse's trust. She studied him, her expression unreadable, then gave a single nod. "One chance," she said. "You spook her, you're gone by dawn." She turned toward the door, gesturing for him to follow. The corral waited outside, Juniper pacing under the fading light, her coat glowing like embers. Caleb felt a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or just the ghost of it, stir in his chest as he stepped into the heat. The mare lifted her head as they approached, her ears pinned back, wary. Caleb moved slow, his hands open, his voice a low murmur. "Easy, Juniper. I'm here." The words were for her, but they felt like a promise to himself, one he wasn't sure he could keep. Eleanor watched, her shadow long and still, as the mare took a tentative step toward him, her breath a soft cloud in the cooling air. The corral fence was rough under Caleb's palms, splintered wood biting into his skin as he leaned against it. The evening air had cooled, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain, a promise that wouldn't be kept. Juniper stood at the far end of the pen, her ears twitching, her body taut as a bowstring. The last light of the day caught her coat, turning it to molten copper, and Caleb felt his breath catch, not just at her beauty but at the way she seemed to hold the world at bay, unyielding. Eleanor stood a few paces off, her arms crossed, her face a mask of skepticism and something softer, harder to name. The silence between them was heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Caleb stepped into the corral, slow, his boots stirring small clouds of dust. Juniper snorted, her hooves shifting, but she didn't bolt. He kept his eyes on her, not challenging but steady, letting her feel his presence. His hand stayed low, open, the way he'd learned years ago from a drover who'd said horses could smell fear, but they could smell honesty, too. He wasn't sure he had much of that left, but he offered what he could, his voice a soft hum, barely words, just sound to bridge the gap between them. The mare took a step, then another, her head lowering slightly. Caleb's chest loosened, just a fraction, as if a knot inside him had begun to unravel. He saw mercy in his mind's eye, her steady gait on long nights, the way she'd carried him through storms and starlight. The memory was a weight, but it steadied him, too, grounding him in this moment with Juniper. "That's it, girl," he murmured, taking a slow step forward. She didn't shy away, and that small victory felt like air to a drowning man. Eleanor's voice cut through, low but clear. "You're wasting your time if you think she'll come easy. She's kicked every hand I've hired." Her tone was sharp, but there was a tremor in it, like she wanted to believe but couldn't afford to. Caleb didn't look back. "She's not kicking now," he said, his voice calm, his focus on the mare. Juniper's ears flicked, and she took another step, her muzzle brushing his outstretched hand. Her breath was warm, tentative, and he felt a rush of something, relief, maybe, or the ghost of purpose. He didn't push, didn't move closer, just let her stand there, her trust fragile as frost. He thought of the nights after Red Wash, the endless walking, the way the plains had seemed to laugh at his smallness. He'd been a boy once, dreaming of wide skies and fast horses, but the world had ground those dreams to dust. Yet here, with Juniper's breath against his skin, he felt a spark of that boy again, stubborn and alive. The mare stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his, and he let his hand rest on her neck, feeling the pulse beneath her coat, steady as a heartbeat. Eleanor moved closer, her boots crunching softly. "I don't understand you," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a confession. "You're half dead, got nothing to your name, but she trusts you." "Why?" Caleb's throat tightened. He wanted to say it was just horses, just instinct, but that wasn't the whole truth. "Maybe she knows I got nothing left to lose," he said, his eyes still on Juniper. "Makes it easier to be honest." The words felt raw, like they'd been torn from somewhere deep, and he regretted them the moment they left his mouth. Eleanor didn't respond, but he felt her gaze, heavy and searching. The mare shifted, her weight settling, and the corral seemed to shrink around them, the world narrowing to the three of them in the fading light. Caleb's mind drifted to the foreman's voice, the rustler's shadows, the way he'd stood alone as the wagons rolled away. He'd been running from that moment, but here, with Juniper's warmth under his hand, he felt the pull of something new, not redemption, not yet, but a choice. To stay, to try, to risk being seen. The sky deepened to indigo, stars pricking through the haze. Eleanor's shadow merged with the dusk, and Caleb felt the weight of her silence, not as judgment but as a question. He could walk away come morning, let the plains swallow him again, or he could stay, face whatever this place demanded. Juniper's head dipped, nuzzling his shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. The stars hung low, sharp as pinpricks against the bruised sky. The corral was a pool of shadow now, Juniper's form a faint glow in the dark, her breath a soft rhythm that anchored Caleb to the earth. His hand lingered on her neck, the warmth of her coat seeping into his palm, steadying the tremor in his bones. Eleanor stood just beyond the fence, her silhouette barely distinguishable, but he felt her presence like a weight, her silence louder than the night's hum. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of dust and distant pine, and it stung his cracked lips, reminding him he was still alive, still here. He stepped back from Juniper, slow, giving her space to settle. The mare didn't move, her eyes glinting in the starlight, and Caleb felt a pang, gratitude, maybe, or the ache of something he'd thought he'd lost. He turned toward Eleanor, her face half hidden in shadow, her arms still crossed like a barrier. "She'll come around," he said, his voice low, rough from disuse. "Just needs time. Someone to trust." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, catching the faint light. "You talk like you know her better than I do," she said, but there was no venom in it, just a quiet challenge. "I've spent months trying to break her. She's still half wild." "And you?" She stopped, her gaze raking over him, his tattered coat, his hollowed cheeks. "You walk in, half a ghost, and she listens. Makes no sense." Caleb's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her it wasn't about sense, that it was about feeling the same kind of broken and still standing anyway. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he saw the trail again, the endless stretch of dust and sky, the moment he'd realized Mercy was gone. He'd knelt by her body, his hands useless, the plains indifferent to his grief. That loss had carved something out of him, left a space where Juniper's trust could fit, fragile but real. "Maybe she sees something I don't," Eleanor said, her voice softer now, almost lost in the wind. She stepped closer, the fence between them, and for the first time, Caleb saw the lines etched around her eyes, the weight of her own ghosts. "You can sleep in the barn tonight. There's a cot, blankets. Don't make me regret it." He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The offer was small, practical, but it felt like a crack in the wall she'd built, a sliver of light in the dark. He followed her toward the barn, his boots heavy in the dirt, the night pressing close. The barn smelled of hay and old leather, the air thick with the musk of animals long gone. Eleanor pointed to a corner, where a cot sagged under a pile of rough blankets. "Don't touch anything," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "I'll know." She left without another word, her footsteps fading into the night. Caleb sank onto the cot, the frame creaking under his weight. The darkness was heavy, but it wasn't empty. Juniper's whinny drifted from the corral, a faint tether to the world outside. He lay back, staring at the rafters, their outlines barely visible. His mind churned, pulling him back to the drive, to the foreman's cold eyes, to the boy he'd been, full of dreams that had crumbled like the earth under his feet. He'd run from that boy, from the weight of failure, but here, in this barn, with Juniper's trust still warm in his hands, he felt the stir of something new. Not hope, not exactly, but a choice, to stay, to face the morning, to see what this place might demand of him. The blankets were coarse, but they held the cold at bay. He closed his eyes, the mare's breath echoing in his memory, blending with Mercy's, with the wind's low moan. Eleanor's face lingered, too, her storm-gray eyes, her guarded words. She was a woman who'd lost something, same as him, and that shared weight felt like a bridge, shaky but real. He could leave at dawn, let the plains take him, or he could stay, risk the vulnerability of being seen. The choice hung there, heavy as the night, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like running. The barn's darkness wrapped around Caleb like a heavy coat, the kind that smothers as much as it warms. The cot creaked beneath him, its thin mattress doing little to ease the ache in his bones. Outside, the night was alive with small sounds, Juniper's soft huffing, the wind's restless sigh, the faint creak of the corral fence. Each sound anchored him, kept him from slipping back into the haze of memory, where the plain stretched endless and merciless, and Mercy's body lay still under a cruel sun. He stared at the rafters, their shapes lost in shadow, and felt the weight of the choice before him, to stay, to face Eleanor's guarded trust and Juniper's wild heart, or to walk on, let the land swallow what little was left of him. Dawn came slow, a faint gray seeping through the barn's slatted walls. Caleb rose, his body stiff, his hands raw from the fence and the cold. He stepped outside, the air sharp with frost, the plains stretching wide and silent under a sky streaked with pale light. Juniper stood in the corral, her breath clouding in the chill, her eyes meeting his with a quiet knowing. He approached, slow, his voice a low murmur, and she didn't shy away. His hand found her neck, the warmth of her coat grounding him, and for a moment, the world felt steady, like it might hold him up instead of breaking him down. Eleanor appeared at the edge of the corral, her dress muted in the dawn's light, her face unreadable but softer than before. She carried a tin mug, steam curling from it, and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Coffee," she said, holding out the mug. "Bread and jerky in the cloth. You'll need it if you're working with her." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes lingered on Juniper, then Caleb, as if measuring the space between them. He took the mug, the heat stinging his palms, and nodded. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling foreign, heavy with a gratitude he hadn't earned. He sipped the coffee, bitter and strong, and it woke something in him, a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Eleanor leaned against the fence, watching as he set the mug down and turned to Juniper, his hands moving slow, guiding her in a gentle circle. The mare followed, her steps tentative but willing, her trust a fragile thread he was careful not to snap. "You're not like the others," Eleanor said after a long silence, her voice low, almost lost in the dawn's quiet. "Most men come through here looking for something, work, money, a way out. They don't see her." She nodded toward Juniper, her eyes distant. "They don't see what's broken." Caleb's throat tightened. He saw his own brokenness in Juniper's wary steps, in the way she held herself, ready to bolt but choosing to stay. He saw it in Eleanor, too, in the way her hands gripped the fence, her knuckles pale. "I see her," he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "Seen broken things before. Doesn't mean they can't heal." Eleanor's gaze flicked to him, sharp and searching, but she didn't speak. The silence stretched, filled only by Juniper's soft snorts and the crunch of her hooves. Caleb felt the weight of the past, Mercy's loss, the foreman's betrayal, the boy he'd been, dreaming of a life bigger than the plains. He'd carried that weight so long it had become part of him, but here, with Juniper's trust and Eleanor's quiet offering, it felt lighter, like a burden he might set down. The sun rose higher, its light spilling over the corral, warming the dust. Juniper tossed her head, her coat gleaming, and Caleb felt a shift, a moment of clarity. He could stay, work with the mare, earn Eleanor's trust, or he could walk away, let the plains claim him. The choice wasn't easy, but it was his. He looked at Eleanor, her face softened by the dawn, and saw not just a woman who'd lost something, but one who'd chosen to keep standing, same as him. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and Caleb took a breath, letting it fill him. The plains were still there, vast and unforgiving, but they didn't feel so heavy now. Juniper nuzzled his shoulder, and he smiled, faint but real, the first in weeks. The world was quiet, the dawn light warm, and for the first time, he felt not just seen, but known.